into policy, because that is the most important part of this, is yes, localizing, doing the small actions, but also being able to figure out how we can collectively bring policy to this. This is why we invite also policymakers to this event, and hopefully if we do this every month, we can start mapping out how that's possible. We are going to try to do a nonprofit, you know, a very simple step into being able to get more funding around this topic, but also being able to get conversations around how we can bring people to the table that really know how to draw all of the let's see, connections into policy. So if we can, I just want to ask a couple of questions, starting with you, Steven. I know that we are kind of running short on time, but how have you seen, I mean, in your experience, how have you seen policy around this change? I know right now we have very limited IP in terms of like how that looks. Do you have any idea, or can you speak on some of the inner workings that you've seen?
So, like, I see stuff from multiple countries, so not just in the U.S. And I feel saddened about how the Republicans have tried to have less governance controlling AI. Whereas I have a good friend, she's actually an ethical AI attorney in the EU, like in four European countries, and they're always doing new things within the EU in order to try to regulate AI. And then they're using AI also in different African nations, and every country has their own policy. But policy is very important in order to try to prevent something from being used in a bad way. So like without policy, government laws, then people could just do whatever they want, and so I do think that there needs to be regulation of policy to prevent, in order to secure AI being used in an ethical manner, if that makes sense.
And how were you inspired to do, what was your inspiration around making policy as one of the things that?
The inspiration, good question, Tanya, around the policy part would be that we have open standards right now. There's open internet standards, and people have lobbied and advocated for those standards. And I believe that we should have the same lobbying for those standards for OpenAI. I mean, OpenAI, the company originally started, it was meant to be a non-profit. Now it's almost, you know, it's kind of not a joke, but it's kind of, they're going after it. They are all about business, satisfying stakeholders, etc. I believe that we need to have open standards around access to the models, because the way I see it, right now we're getting these wonderful free models that have been trained by the big companies, and we can use them locally. The way things progress with every service we use online, whether it's Google search, YouTube, there's been a degradation in these services. A local guy from San Francisco, Cory Doctorow, wrote a book. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Inshitification. It's okay. He's published. He's been on all the news networks. Basically, I can really envision the big corporations saying, "We're not going to give you those models anymore." Right now, there's open licenses. We have Apache 2.0, MIT licenses. I would like us to advocate for being, no, these open AI models, they're a right. It's not a privilege. There's a right for everyone. And the second part of that is, how do we build policy around the frontier models, around the subscription models, around the cloud vendors, around the Skynet? So there's two parts there. And I think we have to get in there now ahead of the curve, build alliances with people who are thinking about this. You know, I know that Bernie Sanders is very much, he has his finger on the pulse here. Recently, he did a really interesting interview online where Claude is interviewing him, and it's a really thought-provoking interview. It's almost like a postmodern experiment, but I think we need to build alliances like this across the board and advocate for policy. So we have the tools, we have access to them. And a slight tangent, we were talking about economically distressed parts of the world. I think that people in the global economic south don't have access to these frontier models we have here in the US or the Western or the economic north. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could provide models that are almost frontier for free running on commodity hardware for those people in the world's economic south?
That kind of speaks to something that a lot of indigenous people speak about with their infrastructures. They talk about their history going onto these AI spaces, and they know that they have to carry on all of this history that they've kept sacred off the internet, off all of these models. And so we wonder if local AI could potentially be that answer, because it keeps the information central and it allows you to still use some of the same tools as LLMs, but not necessarily make them intellectual property for someone else. It could actually stay local. So if you were here earlier and saw the demo, you are able, and this is obviously in there. How long has local AI been around, and being able to localize, keep things local? Because I know in my experience in SaaS, we have security issues oftentimes that we have to speak to our clients and make sure that we localize their experience to their own devices. So is that kind of the same model of local AI?
Well, I would say, Tania, that what we're talking about local AI in the common marketplace is generative AI, is the chatbots, is large language models have been trained by the big corporations, and they're releasing their models at open weights. It means we can get them. They're for educational and for non-profit use, which is amazing. And you can actually look into them and see what they're trained on, because the local, I'm diverging a little bit, the cloud models, we don't actually know how they are shaping our interactions. We don't know semantically or epistemologically how they're shaping the way we interact with them. So ergo, they've got a huge influence on how millions of people at scale are basically interpreting their world. Back to your question, the local AI models, there's been, for me, I'd say since 2023, that was kind of like the year the gates opened, or was it 22, when the first GPT, generatives protocol, transformative. Anyway, that was the year the chat GPT models were kind of released into the world. And there's a whole maker, hobbyist, engineers playing around at home on these. It's like a maker movement too. So I think that, to answer your question, around 22, 23.
I guess one of my last questions, and I want to open it up to the audience too, to talk about this in terms of policy, because this is kind of it's a touchy subject, meaning I don't have a lot of experience in it, but I know it's necessary. Is there anybody in the audience that can speak to policy and can speak to potentially some ideas around like how we can shape policy around this? Because it is, we have lobbyers that are speaking on the other side. How do we lobby this conversation and make sure that we bring that bring this back to what we can do here at GLAM Projects? If anybody else can speak on this, I would love to hear from you. Anybody that can speak on policy or bringing that conversation forth. No one here? Okay. See, that's how difficult it is. Well, my ask is essentially just that, like, how do we organize to create policy around this? Because it just seems like a very overwhelming topic. We know what the problem is. We know they're taking our data, but how are we able to kind of take those first steps? And so that's kind of like the collective conversation that I wanted to bring to forth.
So, very private opinion. I work for the Wikimedia Foundation, but this is a very private opinion just for me, working for more than 20 years, for actually 30 years on the internet, having been a big proponent on open knowledge and basically like open source licensing, which all those models are thriving on. So all of those models would not exist with something like Wikipedia being as proficient. I think a lot of those topics that you've touched on and you've been saying from a policy perspective make a lot of sense. In my opinion, the policy question starts with copyright and starts with copyleft copyright question. If we are saying, oh, the OpenAI does something wrong, then like yes, they are doing something wrong because there's no clear definition resolution on what are they training on and how are they attributing their training data on. And there's a number of blog posts that about 2028, I think, was one estimation, these large language models will hit a wall where they don't have new training data anymore because people are not putting their blog posts out anymore, are not contributing enough new content anymore on Reddit, which is another big source, by the way. So very Western, very US focused training data to start with. Because people are just like going and posting AI's AI data put through the wall on the internet again. And if I would be a policymaker, then I would be concerned about that. I would be like, okay, so how can we make people's creativity not go away and just rely on AI in order to post something on the internet? That would be my first angle.
Because that is a concern. Actually, a senator brought up just very recently how our next generations are actually not becoming more innovative. There's like a growth spurt, like a stunt in terms of their development, and a lot of that will probably be because there's just a lot of, to your point, regurgitated information that is just kind of, after a while, if it's just AI speaking to AI, then what is that? But I find that it is kind of our responsibility, and actually that we could speak to education, that it is important that, and we've actually, I have a couple of professor friends of mine that refuse to have AI in their classrooms at all because they need to encourage people to think, because he's giving out Fs like every day, just Fs all the time, because he can tell the difference between AI papers and actually, you know, any kind of critical thought. And so those are kind of the topics that we're kind of thinking about as to how we're bringing this all together with professors, speaking with just how to make sure that it's all based on research that is written by people. So that's kind of the thing that impressed me today, is just how we can upload local documents and still have interactions, but be able to not so much pull from this large data source that might be information that isn't even accurate to some extent. So, and it spends more time on the deep work of people that have, even if you have like, if you're talking about authors, like any of these books here, if we're able to upload that locally and have conversations with LLMs rather than it being like pulling from all kinds of sources that we really don't know.
Just for clarification, how is it different to grab that itself and upload it into the local model as opposed to the big frontier models, you know, scraping from Wikipedia or scraping through knowledge libraries of books that have been written? Do you all see a distinction? No, ethical, yeah.
You know, if someone's a writer, an artist, a music producer, however, that's copyrighted material, that's real human effort. You know, there's a demarcation between what are humans producing, what are machines producing. And I think, and as part of this movement, I think we should have an ethical charter that we don't upload copyrighted material. Speaking to that, there was a huge court case recently, and I think all of these legitimate authors, they got like a minuscule amount of money from a big publisher to say like, okay, we've trained our models on your intellectual copyright, and we're going to give you a little stipend here. But back to your question, copyright material. If you've purchased the book legitimately, perhaps you can upload it to your own LLM. And I've thought of doing that. I've done it with a couple of things. But no, if something is a copyright material, it should only be for your own private use.
It's interesting, and this is kind of a controversial topic, but May, WEBB, that Ian Carroll, I don't know if you're familiar with Ian Carroll's work, but he's a podcaster, and he took the Epstein files and kind of localized that. I don't know if you saw that, but yeah, so yeah, because it was fascinating. He essentially made an LLM for the Epstein files, for the millions of documents. Who's going to go through 300 million, 3 million documents? So he created WEBB to be, well, you might go through them, but most people are not going to go through that much. But he created a local LLM and gave access to different people, but it's open source, and it speaks to local AI for that reason, so that we can expedite any kind of, and I think that would be good, even all the documents that we see in government, they do these big dumps, and how do we as people go through them? We could use these kind of local AIs to be able to kind of go through that. So yeah, go ahead.
Thanks again, Tania. Back to your question here, I think someone in the audience asked, what was the ask today? And this gentleman here mentioned you work for the Wikimedia Foundation, correct? Well, I would think who are our natural allies, or who in this room has got connections to Wikimedia, the Mozilla Foundation, EFF, which stands for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So there are natural allies out there for a mobilization like this. So if anyone's got any ideas in the room about who else we should be allying with. And also, as Tania mentioned already, everyone in this room is part of this mobilization. We're here today to see if you guys want to be partners also, be part of growing this. So the ask was, what is the ask? The ask might be, who else should we be talking to? And who else could help foster those introductions?
Okay. You have a question? Okay, all right.
So I did a little bit of research on like Sweden's AI initiative, and I know in terms of like AI fluency, the government's trying to upskill people in the or doing like government workers or their teachers, professors, etc. But I was wondering if either of you have any thoughts on sort of the other side of it, in terms of, are they using local, AI? Are they considering, any protections for copyright and such? I don't know if you have any perspectives on that initiative. More so your thoughts on the initiative as like if it's good, bad, are they approaching it the right way, and if maybe they have some of those like local, like they're using local LLMs, or just your general thoughts on if it's a good initiative or not, or like a good kind of blueprint to follow potentially for other countries.
I think the idea is very nascent and quite maybe juvenile right now of using local LLMs, but I think one use case, because one thing that could come out of the global local mobilization is bringing developers, bringing people that want to develop for good. And one thing that I've talked to before is making, for example, I'm not a lawyer, and I considered building something for disadvantaged communities for a legal corpus, but that's a big hill to climb. But I'm saying if we brought the right people on board here to this movement, we could build tooling, open source tooling, because this is an open source movement, open source tooling for those people in disadvantaged communities, such as, well, anywhere that's economically distressed, making any products for good that come out of this movement available for public good. Does that sort of answer the question? It's not policy, it's more kind of innovation, I suppose. How are we doing for time, Tania?
We wanted to kind of close out. Oh, we have with like one more question? Okay. All right. Sure. That's actually a great question. What candidates do you know that are more tuned into this type of conversation about privacy? That are, well, I do know that Tom is here and as part of this conversation within Climate Tech, so I would like to kind of touch it. Bye. Hopefully we'll get to connect with it. Yeah. Okay, great. So yes, we are, I think that's a conversation to have with them because I don't think California has great policy around this. And when I see what's happening with the writers in Hollywood and all of the strikes that they created around this, I could just see that there's just still not a lot of policy strong enough. And I think it's a conversation that we could definitely bring to them. To say I don't know. that's my answer. Are you aware of any of the governors actually speaking on this? No, he's coming from Africa. So.
As I mentioned before, Bernie Sanders seems to have his finger on the pulse, like he has with a lot of things actually. He definitely seems to be someone, but he's in Vermont. We need to find someone here in California. So, who are our candidates this year anyway? Tom Steyer.
I can't speak to the other one running for governor. But yeah, he's screaming others. But yeah, no, I will say that thank you so much. Yeah, for bringing all this together. I mean, it was but it was your motivation to all of us. And if you have any questions for Steven or for anything to do with GLAM, we're here at the end. So yeah, thank you so much for coming. Thank you. Yeah.
We've got some, we do have some DJs here if anyone wants to have an EarthDay boogie. We can give some of our energy chakras for the planet.